thanks for inviting us, for starters. I've had a lot of talks about this motorbike. It's been around the world a lot here. I originally built this in 80 and early 81, and we raced it at Oran Park at the Coke 800 in February 81, and then at Bathurst in the RI 500 in April 81. Then subsequent to that, Greg Pretty, our rider, was contracted to Honda, and my uncles were a bit reluctant to continue racing unless we had someone like Greg, and so we ended up stopping the program with this bike, and so it only raced won twice, and that was it. But there's a fair bit of history in the bike of what happened with it. So what I've done is I made a copy of the original workshop book for this bike. So I handed it around, you can have a bit of a look through. I made a couple so everyone can have a bit of a look. And the other thing I did was, everyone always asks me what the factory kit involves, so I made a list of the factory kit stuff. So I probably landed on my feet with this bike in a way because we had pretty close ties with the Yamaha factory, because at Pitmans we'd done a lot of racing, and so the factory were good enough to send out two race kits for this bike, one as spare parts and one as the actual bike. And I've made that list on that, in that sheet there. It tells you what was in the factory kit. It was very comprehensive. The big problem was they wanted us to race it as a shaft drive because it was XS 1100, and I never actually wanted to race XS 1100s because they were too heavy, but we had to because we had nothing else, and we had good results, so it sort of worked out okay. And then this was sort of the next level, going to the this one and making it a Chaindrive. So you'll notice from the information I put there that the factory was a very comprehensive kit, but it was designed to go with a shaft drive. So I then organised with guys in Adelaide to cast up covers, and once we'd done that, do a swing arm, and we had a Chaindrive. I was a bit worried about whether they'd let us race it because it's a shaft drive bike, and we raced it as a Chaindrive bike, but the rules in those days were fairly loose, and they said we could change wheels, we could change swing arm, we could change engine covers, but it never said anything about Chaindrive or shaft drive. So we thought we'll take the punt and do it, and they were happy. No one complained about it. We had a Chaindrive XS 11. They might have complained if we kept racing it, I reckon, because we were considering doing the Nippon Denso Superbike Championship in 81 and 82, but as I said, Greg went, so we never got there to do it. I had a lot of guys help us to do the bike. I had a guy that did casting, machining. He worked in his backyard, and he was exceptional. I had Green Welding did all the welding on the bike for us when we made the swing arm, and then Snowy Ardle helped us set the make sure the chassis was straight once we put all the stuff together, and of course Pitmans. I rated their spare parts to get what I needed, which didn't go down with Mal Sharp, the guy we had in charge. He always felt that I was stealing parts, which is as it goes, but we were pretty happy because off the bat it did a good job. It was pretty reliable. We knew the motors were good. I was a bit worried about chassis, but we were fortunate because the Coke 800 was a wet race, and the power delivery on this I ran in the first race. I just ran a standard motor with standard carburetors and just snorkels on the carbies, and that was good for 8 hours. All the other guys ran hotties, and they suffered pretty bad during the wet racing because the bikes were hard to ride, power delivery was terrible, and they were all superstars, and it just didn't go down good, but this thing just plodded around and did the job. And then at Bathurst it was a 3-hour race, and at Bathurst our top speed on this was 254. The Suzuki of Phyllis was 256 and the Honda of Dennis Neal was 258, so it was pretty close. But I'd put cams in this for the top, going up the hill, through the top, and this thing drove really hard up through there, and Greg could easily keep up with the other guys. They had the speed down the straight, but their bikes were much more of a handful over the top, which is what you do at Bathurst. You've got to get through the top. The straight's sort of a icing on the cake. Yeah, and we didn't really have too many problems. The drama I had with the frame was we weren't allowed to modify the frame, so I had to run a roller skate wheel under the bottom to keep the chain from touching the frame because I couldn't cut the bar out. So when this thing came in the corners, the roller skate wheel wouldn't be touching the chain, and then they'd break and it would touch and you'd hear as they come into a corner. And I was always worried it was going to explode, but it didn't. It lasted the distance. What other things? Really not too many other things. It was pretty reliable, bulletproof. I did nearly lose it at Pitmans when we first built it because I had a young guy then, Steve Johnson, who Chris knows. Steve helped us, and when we first got this thing started, the only way to start it was to put an XS11, because we never had wheel starters, put an XS11 here, tie the two bikes together, run the XS11, get this thing going, start her up, and I did all that, but I put the front wheel against the wall to make sure it wasn't a problem. And anyway, we didn't have wheel stands, we just had a drum under each footrest, and I'm just and then I put in the gear and checking everything, and it slipped off the drums. And she just went straight up the wall, bang! And I thought, that's it, she'll be done. But anyway, the bike was still okay, but it wasn't a good move. And so Stevie's pretty small, and he was like this for a while because, you know, when it's in gear, she launches. The other thing that we were pretty fortunate with is at the 800 race, the rear wheel that we used was off a TZ750, and they're not designed to do heaps and heaps of miles, and it had no cush drive. So during the race there, the rear wheel come loose on the sprocket carrier, and it was only my younger brother was there, and we had to change the wheel because it had come loose. And he said, what do you want me to do? I said, well, you might as well fix the other wheel up. And fortunately he did, because we put the other wheel in, we fixed it, and it finished the race. Otherwise we would have been stuck for laps in the pits. And then at Bathurst, again, because we hadn't run anything like this at Bathurst, the rear tyre on the last lap was down to the last layer of canvas of the tyre. And if you had done another lap, it probably would have gone boof, because it was right through. So that's pretty fortunate, pretty lucky for us for that to happen. Yeah, so really I'm open to questions if anyone wants to ask about it. I know lots about it, but I forget a lot as well. But
this is not a technical question, but when you decided to make it into a Chaindrive and then entered it into races, because I got involved in this situation at Bathurst, when you entered it in races, did Honda and Kawasaki object because it was changed instead of?
They didn't, no. And I'm not sure why. They did afterwards. I mean, I read reports in magazines where guys are really unhappy that we were allowed to run it because it was a chain drive bike and it should have been shaft drive. But the guys that mattered, I don't think they thought it was going to do any good. Yeah. And so they just didn't do anything about it. So we were fortunate. Maybe, I think if we had kept going, it might have been an issue in the NGK championship, whatever it was.
You know, the factory parts list is massive. What series were the Japanese building those parts for? We're talking about one bike here in Australia, and I can't remember anything else in the world where they raced shaft-driven XS1100s.
Yeah, they supplied a kit. They supplied a complete motor with chain drive to Claude Fior in one of his bikes for the 24 Boldor.
And that was pretty much it?
That was it, yeah. Well, there was only 3 kits came to Australia, 2 to me and 1 to Adam Thompson, who were the old Yamaha distributors in Queensland. And they were going to get Dave Robbins to ride it, and I made for them swing arm the same, supplied all the bits and pieces. And then when Greg went to Honda, they dropped the ball and they ended up selling everything to South Africa.
Yeah, so basically, essentially, the bike, the Japanese parts thing was purely for the bolt door.
Yeah. But they never asked for the stuff back.
I mean, forget it came here, that's right. I was wondering why they would commit so much resources and so much thing with the twin plug head and all that sort of thing, and the testing they must have done for such limited exposure.
I know. You know, for me, I can't understand why they did it. Because the development work on the motor is from Toyota 2000 GT. So it's got carbies, buckets, valves, pretty much is what the Toyota 2000 GT has.
That's something else, man. I don't know if a lot of people realise how much development work Yamaha do for outside companies.
Yeah.
All our engines are designed by Yamaha. There's so much out there that
Yeah, well,
done by Yamaha.
they do a lot with Toyota as well. They build a lot of their engines. He come past every year, he'd stop in, I want to buy the Chaindrive, can I buy it? And I said, nah. And then the old guy said, you've got to sell it. So I sold it to him. And when I sold it to him, he had 11 XS 1100s, so he had some serious issues to have that many XS 1100s. And so he bought it, took it home, put it in his shed, and it stayed there for 35 years. Never told anyone he had it, didn't pull it out, just left it in the shed. And then he got really sick, and one of his mates come over that used to look at his bikes a bit, and he said, go and have a look in the shed. Walks in, he saw this, and he knew what it was, so he bought it. Then he rung me up to restore it, and we ran it at Eastern Creek in 18, and Jim Scraysbrook rode it, and also Alan Cathcart rode it for their magazines. And then this guy that owns it now, he was the nephew of the original guy, the big guy that bought it from me, and he lives on the Atherton Tablelands, and so he bought it, and then rung me up and said he wanted to get the original carbies fitted because I'd put a set of smooth bores on it, and so he sent it down, and so I put those on. We showed it at the Vintage Japanese Rally just a few weeks ago, and then Chris asked us if we could put it at the Sporting Car Club, so we did that, and then tonight. But it's not my bike, I just sort of looking after getting it sort of back to what it was. So I would like to fire it up at some stage. It just needs battery, fuel, change the oil, and it's a runner. I had to rebuild all the brakes because they'd all gone to pieces from being in northern Queensland. But it runs with a set of tyres on, it's good enough to do fast laps. So it's still in really good order.
Is that an adjusted tank size? It looks very big from down here.
No, what it is, it's a standard tank, but I lifted the cap out. See how the cap's sitting on top? And that gives it another 3 litres. Because the standard tanks go down in, and they're listed as 24 litres, but if you can get the fuel into the top of the tank here, it's 27 litres. So when we race them, we used to put a copper tube in while we're filling to let the air out so that we could get a full 27 litres. Then we could do over an hour and a half at speed.
What about the forks? Can you tell us about the forks, the front suspension?
The front forks? Yeah, well, we had to run standard forks, as in standard sizes, which is not so good because these are only 37 mil, and they do a bit of the, come to mama type stuff when you're going fast. But in the day, everyone else had the same problems. So when you got those sorts of problems, you're all the same. But nowadays, of course, they're way too small, and the brakes are too old. They work, but they're not like a late model 4-spot.
How do you go about getting decent tank material for long distance races?
Well, the brakes, like Bathurst, brakes not a big issue apart from the end of the main straight. And so you're not applying the brakes all that often. So they're okay there. And because we're in the rain at Oran Park, again, it wasn't a problem. So we sort of landed on our feet. It should have been a problem, but we landed on our feet in basically both races. But the brakes are not that good. But they were best brakes for the day, for this sort of bike.
Well, you said the head and carbies came from Yamaha.
Yep.
Why did they go for solids and over the original CVs?
Well, Yamaha,
That's obviously difficult to tune for high performance.
yeah. Well, Yamaha and Honda won't use the same products. They're a bit better now, but in those days we couldn't use Kians because Kian was partly owned by Honda, and Yamaha would never borrow that. And so Honda would never borrow Mikuni's because Yamaha used Mikuni's. But I think the reason they use this is they've had some bright spark at the factory go, let's build a motor, and they had the technology from doing all their 2000 GT stuff, so they just basically used all that stuff. Not really thinking about it as I don't think as a motorbike, they just thought about it as a high performance engine. So I think that's why, because I was worried about these, because the floats go sideways. So I was worried about right turn, left turn, all that sort of stuff. Whereas the other carbies are, floats go backwards.
The only other bike that I know of that uses a similar carbine to that is the Drixton Hondas. They had either Solexes or Weavers. The Weaver and Solex are basically the same.
Yeah, well, at Bathurst we never had a problem with the carbs. But I reckon if we did tight stuff, like hard braking, accelerating, change of direction, like places like Winton and Broadford and Mount Gambier, it would start flat spotting, I reckon. Because I put a set of key and smooth bores on this just so we could run it at Festival of Speed in 18, and they felt really good. And I know the smooth bores, you probably had about, well, on our YZF 750 superbikes we built, we put flat slides on, they gave us 8 horsepower just putting the carbs on. So that's a good amount of horsepower, and I reckon on this it'll probably be a bit the same. But the work they've done in the motor is really good. They've done a good job.
You got any idea of the horsepower numbers?
Well, we took this to the dyno before we went to Eastern Creek. We went to dyno with Lee Hollenby, and Chris came as well, and they put it on a car dyno down at the trade school. And what did you say it was, about 105 kilowatt? Yeah, it was 104, calculated to 144 horsepower at the back wheel. And knowing how fast the thing was at Bathurst, I think it would be fairly close to that because it was fast. The 3 front guys just, see you later. And I thought this wouldn't keep up, but it did. And then they had problems, and we ended up winning it by just over a lap because we didn't have any problems, apart from a rear tyre that was going to explode. But we had no experience with that. Yeah, but like I said, we were probably a bit fortunate, but the kit worked spot on. There was no dramas with what they said. As you probably saw that thing I've sent around to you, there's a bit of stuff in the kit. And so I just had to really make sure the chassis was okay.
For engine cooling, does that oil filter cool all the oil or just part of the oil some of the time?
No, it does all the oil. It's in line with the full system, yeah. So this has got a magnesium pickup plate for the cooler and also magnesium oil filter plate, which is part of their kit. The motor seemed good, but because it's 1100, it's got plenty of fin area. If you're out to 1300, it'd probably be a bit of a worry. But we only ever race it as an 1100, so cooling was not too bad. Once it was running, I mean, it gets hot quick because it's high compression, but once it's running, it's good. Probably the hardest thing for me to do was the swing arm, because the swing arm is chrome moly. And that was hard work because I'd never used chrome moly before, and I didn't realise how tough it was. So the U-bit on there was around a pole to get it made. When I had it welded, I built it in a jig and then had it welded, and you finished off the welding out the jig and it went like that. So then to get it square again was really hard. But we got it in the end, but it was tough. But that would have been about the hardest thing on the bike. And wood rot on the number plates, that's the only other thing. So we probably were thinking of asbestos plates in the early days, but that probably wasn't a good move. Yeah, well, we've got the special air pressure gauge.
The vertical lid load at sea level pressure, you got 48 kilograms per square metre.
Yeah.
You got a fair area there.
Well, I was always surprised. We went to races and all the guys had number plates like that. And I'm going, why would you put a number plate like that? Because it lifts the front up and it's a wind dam. So ours was fully adjustable. She's Porsche slash Mercedes special. Yeah, but in those days, wood was it. We never had plastic. Very hard to get plastic number plates. So it was wood or fiberglass. And I laughed when I started working on this because we never had cable ties. It was copper wire, put it around, tape it, wire it up, whatever. That was what it was. There was no cable ties, really no silicon much right back then. It was very much old school. Even the brake lines and stuff, no plastic coating, they were just metal brake lines, whereas everything now has got to have a plastic coating so it doesn't chafe. But we never ran Avon tyres. I got Avon stickers on it because Avon were good enough to supply us a set of tyres for it. So I just thought, well, I'll put Avon stickers on. And then I got a guy to make the RI 500 stickers because it just added a bit of old school flavour to it. But it was always an imposing bike because the tank's so big. It just stands out because it's such a big fuel tank.
Who designed the graphics? Who did the graphics? That actually sort of sets the bike off.
Yeah, no, it was sort of me, because I'd say what I wanted. And so the paintwork was done by, he's now my neighbour, Max Thompson. He painted it back in 1980. And it's still the same paintwork. It lasted a long time. It was a little bit gone off a bit and Max buffed it up. And it had a dent here where somebody's nuts had either done the job or someone got angry with it, I'm not sure. But no, the paint job was basically, he did it, but we come up with a design.
And in the two races, Mel, were they one rider races or they were two riders?
The first race was two rider. So the first race was Gary Coleman rode with Greg, and that's always difficult because I don't know if you ever watched the race on YouTube. They take long pit stops, and the reason they took long pit stops was because I think Gary couldn't lift his foot, or he must have damaged his foot, so he couldn't work the brake lever enough. So they had to adjust the brake lever position to suit him. So there'd be another 10 or 15 seconds in the pit adjusting the rear brake lever, and you'd see him down there doing something, but it was because he must have had limited movement with his foot. Yeah, I'm thinking that's what it was, but my memory's not good enough, but yeah. But that's the only thing with two riders. You've got to make sure they're happy with handlebars, lever positions, gear lever positions, all that sort of stuff. It makes it difficult if they don't.
I used to have a rule, you set it up for your slowest rider and the fastest rider can deal with it.
Yeah.
Did they ever have any weights on the handlebars? The end? I mean, was it twitchy?
No. I put the steering damper on. Yeah, but it actually doesn't need it because these are fairly rake forks. In those days, standard, they had a lot of rake, and these things had a lot of trail. So standard, they had like 130mm trail. So they, and I think at Oran Park when Greg crashed, he probably came in and it had too much trail. He couldn't turn it tight enough, and he's just dropped it. But that was with running the frame standard, and yeah. But if you ever owned an XS11 on the open road, away they go because they've got a lot of trail and a fair bit of head angle, so very, very stable. But for racing, that's not so good.
Somebody crunched the numbers on the efficiency gain going from that last bevel drive at the back to Chaindrive?
I've never done it, but they reckon that a diff setup takes about 10% horsepower, but it's only what I've heard. But I was just saying, these things when they came out were actually really fast. And Yamaha listed at 95 horsepower, but I think they actually had more than that because they're really heavy and they did really good quarter mile times, and you've got to have a good horsepower to do good quarter mile times. So I think they fudged the performance because you jump on one of these and they're fast in the day compared to the other bikes. And so yeah, who knows? But we never had dynos back then. The dyno was out Port Wakefield Road and see how fast you went between two. Sorry? Yep. Yeah, just calculate the poles and work out how fast you go. And that's how I used to set up all our little production bikes. I'd change gears and I'd want it to pull to say 8.5 on an RD. So 8.5 I'd check, put a marker, 8.5 in the next gear, put a marker, and then I'd do whatever I did, went for another run, and if it got to 8.5 quicker than where the marker was, it was better. And that was the dyno.
Well, did you know, you knew how quick the cop car was coming down the Riverland though, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, because we did testing on these things, and Jeremy will remember this because Greg and I both crashed off of XS11s, but we were based in Swan Reach at a farm. The farm owner, we've got a property up there and he was the owner of that property. So he let us work in his barn, and then we would drive over the ferry into Swan Reach, and then we go dirt road to Loxton, and then straight down the border to Pinaroo, and then to Bordertown. And anyway, we talked to the local cop to say what we're doing, and he sort of turned a blind eye to it, but they had some complaints from Loxton that a bikie gang was terrorising the town. So the cops thought they'd come and sort us out, and they had what did they have in CM Valiant sedans. So they were, we'll catch these guys, and we're doing 180, 200, and we're going out of town. They didn't have a hope in hell of catching us. There was no way they were going to get anywhere near us. So in the end, they rang Swan Reach and said, "Do you know about these guys?" Yeah, they're from Japan, they're testing, just let them be. So we were doing 650k a day, which was hard to ride on an unfaired bike at over 180. They wanted to do over 180, so we like down like this, and we were knackered at the end of the day. It was hard work. And the Japs, of course, they were a struggle because they'd never seen emus, snakes, kangaroos, all that stuff, which was on the side of the road, so they're doing all this sort of stuff, and we're like, so the guy had to have a chat to him, the head technician, no looking, and then we had on the Loxton road, from Swan Reach to Loxton, there was a hump in the road. I don't know whether everyone's ever been that road, it's a dirt road, but it's a hump. Anyway, we used to go over there and we launch and just wheelie it all the way down the other side, and we had this day where we come from both directions. The Japs one way and us the other way, and Jeff Miller was one of the guys riding one of these, and they've gone over, as they went over the hump, he's just turned like that, otherwise you would have had a head on with them over the hump. So then we got the big no more hump wheelie, whatever. And then I got nailed because on the big sweepers I just kept it pinned, and it was wearing away the main stand. They never had any spare main stand, so they said no more mouse son, we only one main stand, finish dragging, no more. But the classic we had was when Greg and I crashed. Greg, he wasn't used to the shaft drive up and down when you gas it on and off, and we come at the top, coming into Mount Pleasant up the top road. We come down the big long downhill run, and I was doing 180. He passed me doing 200, and there's two corners. There's a long sweeper and then a tight bend. And what he did was he went wide on the long sweeper and come in for the tight bend, and of course he was going too quick, so he shut off, and unfortunately I was right behind him, so I've done the same, otherwise I would have run over him, and my bike just did that down the road and disintegrated. And Greg's wasn't too bad, it went over sideways and landed by a fence, but I remember sliding and all I could see was a white post, and then it wasn't there anymore. And when I picked this bike up, the tank was sort of one somewhere. It had a full indent of a white post down to the frame, so the tank went like that. And the Japs weren't even worried about it. So I had to go back to work because it flattened the bike back to the diff on the back, and obviously the forks back to the motor because it did that. So we probably crashed about 140, I reckon, by the time we'd shut off a bit. And I went back to work and bent the heated the exhaust, bent them down so they'd breathe again. They had spare wheels, they had spare forks, and we were riding the next day. Greg had to go to hospital because he wore through his leathers and had a skin graft. but we had no instruments, had a tank with a pole mark in it, seat with no back and tail light that looks like it had been in a major accident. But we got through, got it all done, and we we did advise them what suspension we wanted for the bikes for Australia, and they were keen to do it. And then they went back and they contacted me and said, sorry, my son, the Americans want soft suspension, highway soft suspension. And I said, that's not what we need for Australia and Europe, we need good suspension. And they said, sorry, but the American quantity outrides you guys, so you're not getting it. So I said to them, well, we tested all these suspensions. I said, the suspensions we tested that worked for us were these three. You've got to put them in our parts book. If you do that, we can use them. So that's what happened. They put them in the parts book, and then when we did the Castrol 6-hour, I just made sure everyone that was riding a Yamaha had the correct suspension that we knew worked, and our bikes were on rails. So if they hadn't put in the book, we wouldn't have been able to do it. But the rules were, if it's in the parts book, you can fit it.
When you got the bike back, was there much engine work to do on it? The reconditioning it?
I pulled it completely apart, the whole bike. The motor, the exhaust valves were seized, and it had a bit of water in one of the bores. So pulled it apart, honed the bores, obviously redid the valves and seats and that sort of stuff to make sure it was okay. But surprisingly, it was still pretty good.
So it was just a regrind the valves or new valves?
No, I'd reground because that's the bigger valves, and we never had anything that was the same. So I had to use the same stuff. Yeah, so I did have a spare cylinder head and pistons and some of the exterior stuff. So I've still got some of that stuff. But this used to be a single phase alternator, single phase alternator. But when Greg took it to Winton, crashed and it smashed it all. And it's special, so I haven't got something to replace it. So it's only there for looks, the covers. But that's how it was. And we ran on avgas, which worked really well. I remember going to Bathurst, we were running a TZ750, TZ500 and this, and I had a trailer with 244s of avgas in the back to get us through the weekend. And I think we just got through. The TZ500 in that race used 30 litres of fuel in the 500 race, which was a lot. They held 32, and I made the mistake of not putting 32 in it, and I ran out in the last lap going up the hill, which was a bit of a disappointment, but anyway. But this ran good and the 750 ran good, so 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Puzzles me, the rules come up now, what says no, you're not allowed to use avgas, we're going to be environmentally friendly, rah, rah, rah. And you go to Parafield and you look at the number of people that are doing it, practice touch and goes burning gallons upon gallons upon gallons and stuff. It would make zero difference.
Yeah. I'm a great believer that any bike that was designed for avgas should be run on avgas. So all TZs to me should run on avgas. If they're not, they're too hard to set up different. Huge amount of time and money. And for the amount they use, to me it's, and I know MA has to do it for, government reasons, but I always say to guys, if you're running a TZ or similar, and it came out with avgas, run avgas. Because you damage the motor with unleaded. Because you've got a lower comp, change ignition timing, change exhaust. There's all sorts of things you've got to do to it. And most people don't know how to do it. And they end up seizing. That's what I recommend because they're designed, they should be running what they're designed for in the day. But it's a pretty rare bike because, as Jeremy said, it's the only bike outside of Japan with a factory Yamaha kit. The Fiora engine went back to Yamaha as soon as the bowl door was finished. So I don't know why they let me keep it, but we got it. So for someone, it's a one-off.
What would the value be?
How do you value a factory kit? That's really hard because, like I heard, and it's only heard, so I don't know, but the guy that owns the bike that Dennis Neal crashed, which is a CBR 1100R unfaired one, in a superbike, that had a full factory kit on that, but it all got destroyed. It's been crashed too many times, all got destroyed. The guy was still hoping to get it, close to 100 grand for it. But CB1100Rs obviously are very desirable, but it hasn't got much factory stuff, so.
Perhaps ask yourself the question, how many people in Australia have the knowledge to look after it?
Believe it or not, it's a pretty forgiving bike. It's not special, it's not hard to look after. The only thing I would do if I had it and I was going to say ride it every now and again is I'd put the CR Cayens back on it, because they're just a bit more, to me, user friendly for somewhere like Malala or Mac Park if you're going to run in those places. And he's got them with the bike, they're brand new. So yeah, but honestly, it's not that hard to look after. You know, you guys look after historic bikes, they're hard to look after. This is not that hard to look after, being late model.
Has it got any special valving in the forks?
No, the inside of the forks, again, in the day, we never had things like emulators or any of that sort of stuff. The only thing they had was spring preload, and I basically just played with the valving on the damper rods to suit the oil I wanted to run. But, you know, if you rode this hard, it'd probably not be very good. You'd want to me, you'd want to put in 41mm forks with cartridges and stuff like that to make it a nice thing. Do that, change the discs, change the calipers, put a set of APs on it, and she'd probably be pretty decent.
It looks like it's got a fair bit of fork length that it doesn't use too, like at full bump. You've still got clearance between your fork race and the lower yoke. Yeah,
but it doesn't actually use the full travel. You know, the forks look long, but they don't use all that travel. So, yeah, you'd probably find maybe another inch would be about the maximum for travel for it. But like I say, with what we raced against, they were good. It was only when the Hondas came out, the CBR 1100s and the GSX 11 Suzukis, when they came out, they were a step up. Performance-wise, Suzuki came out with the GX with a big tank, so that was our big thing, was to have a big fuel tank. And the 1100Rs came out, they had everything. They had ground clearance, the right rim sizes, big fuel tank, lighter weight. They just did the job. So I restored the bike that Roger Hayes and Jim Budd rode in the 78 Castrol 6R. I found that actual bike and I restored it and sold that to Motorcycling Australia, because they wanted to have it, because they felt it was the last bike of the original take it off the showroom floor type bike and ride it that anyone would normally have. Because from 79, the Suzukis in 79 were a bit special. Then in 80, the Hondas were special, the CB1100Rs, and after that it was, they made bikes to do the job.
What was the reason behind changing the primary ratio? Was that to try and give the clutch an easier time?
And no, I wanted to run TZ 750 wheels and sprockets. And I told the Jats that's what I wanted to do, and so they recalibrated the internal ratios so I could run a 17 tooth on the front, like a TZ 750, and we ran about 38 on the rear.
Oh, so it was just for you?
It was just for me, yeah.
Just the secondary change the sprocket ratio more than changing the primary ratio that makes the clutch live.
No, I just did it because it was convenient, because we had 3 bikes that had all the same stuff, same sprockets, same wheels, so I just rotate between them. Yeah. So it made it easy for us. But they were good because I told them first gear was pretty low, and they actually made me a taller first gear, which was really good. So that made the gearbox a closer ratio gearbox.
So they gave you a special primary drive, but they left you to concoct a Chaindrive.
Well, they did make the one for Boldor for the Fior bike. They made a Chaindrive on that, but I'm not sure why they didn't sort of suggest the same to us. It's hard to know. You can't reason what the Japanese do sometimes. They just do crazy things. It's like Jeremy said, why did they make these kits? Obviously, the only place they were going to use it was Boldor. Maybe they thought they'd have more people at Boldor, and they didn't. So they thought, what can we do with these kits? Oh, let's send them to Australia. No one will know about it down there. Hard to know. But we were fortunate, we got it. So I reckon this bike I haven't weighed it, but I reckon this will be about 200 kilo with everything that's been taken off.
So the obvious question is, what's the standard street XS 11 bike?
They're 265 without fluids, and they're 285 with fluids. Yeah, they're heavy. You know about it when they crash, they do a bit of damage. I reckon they'd probably cut a car in half if they went straight in the side of a car. They're so solid.
Except for the carburetors, what else would you change on it if you were to go race it again?
I'd put a cush drive on the rear wheel so that there was no chance of it coming, because the problem you have with 11s, they don't have a cush drive on the back end. They've got a cush drive on the lay shaft in the intermediate shaft between the crank and the gearbox. That's got a mechanical cush drive, but they don't have anything on the rear. So basically on 11, if you put it into gear, they clunk when they go into gear. So there's no give to the back. But we had a problem with Greg Pretty because he was one of those guys that never hopped off the bike, got off the bike. He'd just go crankcase touch, okay, or frame touch or foot peg. That's how far he went each way. So I had to grind the end of the crankcases and weld them up, and that's where the oil gallery is, because he would go down and drag the side of the crankcase, and of course then if you did that too much it'd start leaking oil. So but that's how he rode. If you get riders that hang off a bit, it'd probably be okay. Oh, and I'd probably change the forks and rear shockers, put late model stuff on.
Did you try the engine with the standard exhaust system before you modified to the kit version?
No, I just put the full kit on. You got to remember I was only late 20s then. I knew nothing about motorbikes much. So
you cut and shut the standard one, or you put the exhaust kit was
well, 4-to-1 gives you more top end, and 2-to-1 sort of flattens it out a bit in the middle. But we didn't know what to expect because we'd never raced against anything. So the Coke 800 was our first race, and like I said, we were fortunate because it was wet. But I'd put a standard engine to last the distance, and even in that race, if you look at the footage, we weren't that slow compared to a lot of the bikes. So that's what I'm saying. I think these things were a pretty fast bike to start with, and with a standard engine. And then Bathurst, of course, it was like this, and that's the big speed checker at Bathurst. If it's fast at Bathurst, you're in good shape. So yeah, we were. So, but I think it might have been another story if we did the Superbike series. They probably would have nailed us for having a Chaindrive on an XS 1100, particularly if we started to win. It's okay if you don't win, but if you win, it's a problem.
So I know that they make the Chaindrive kits now in Adelaide. Do you know if they sold any of them?
He sold a lot to America. There's a lot of cowboys over there that want Chaindrive because they see the drag results and they sort of think that's what they need to do. But honestly, for general riding on the road, I'd have a shaft drive every time because you don't have to touch it, and they go pretty good. Chaindrive really is just the only reason I wanted it, so I could change the gearing, because a standard 11 at Bathurst was no good because the ratio was wrong for Bathurst, so they couldn't get a good result, whereas the other guys could because they could change the sprockets, and we would have needed to carry a range of diffs around if we wanted to sort of run there, but we didn't want to do that. Yeah, so the weak link with these motors is the primary chain. They can handle so much horsepower. Yeah, well, they had that big primary chain. Yeah, but these, once you get over probably 175 horsepower, the primary chain's not strong enough for it. And so everyone ran the Suzukis because they were gear drive. And then in England, because the Suzukis had all run out of the GSX 11s, they just run out because everyone used it for drag racing, and they whirled the cranks because they were a roller bearing crank. And then there was no more Suzukis. So then when they had the Triple Challenge at, not the Triple Challenge, the International Challenge at Phillip Island, all the ponds come across, they were using FJ 1100, 1200, 1300 motors because they were a gear drive and they were a chain drive. And the reason for that was that they could get 180 plus horsepower and they wouldn't explode. But that was the only drama with these, was that once you got horsepower up that level, it'll break a primary chain. But in road conditions, they go forever. I rebuild them. I've got guys that have done 400,000 kilometres. And you're like, how can you do 400,000 kilometres on a motorbike? But they do.
I did a lot of drag racing in New Zealand, and I used to race Ben Sharp had an XS 1100. I reckon he was doing low 11s. I reckon this would have been like 77, 78, sort of around that era.
Yeah.
I got a CDX, which was just a touch quicker. But I reckon he would have been on the low 11s.
Yeah.
Because these come out and they were doing high 11s, weren't they? I think in America they were doing 11.9, 11.8, 11.9, and they reckon.
Quicker than that, yeah.
Yeah, they reckon. No, but that's what I'm saying. Standard production. They just get a production bike and run it, and they were basically high 11s, and that's why they call them the 11 over there, whereas we called them XS 1100s. They called them the 11s, 1.1s. But they're pretty unbustable, and now there's a huge following of them here in Australia. And it's because people had them, put them away in a shed when they got sick of them, and then they can go to the shed, drag it out, fix the carbies up, put some oil in it, put a new battery in it, make sure it turns over, and away they go again, because they're really unbustable motor, like your 750. They just go forever. And now you can't buy, like I said, you can't buy Suzuki GSX 11s because they've all been used for drag racing and stuff. They're all broken. And you don't see many CB900s, 1100Rs, because the 1100Rs were limited edition. The CB900s, they're probably just a bit small. But XS 11s, heaps of them. They just keep coming out the woodwork. And most guys that have got them have got at least 5 or 6, a bit like you having 3 or 4 750s. That's a disease, you know that, don't you, once you go past one. For Yamaha, it was their first shot at a big multi-cylinder, and they weren't a bad bike for what it was. And then, of course, they learnt from that and went to the FJ series and then the YZF series, and they were really good motorbikes. Through the late 80s and early 90s, Yamaha were pretty strong with the bikes they had. Yeah. Well, when we were doing the testing with the Japs, they had all sensors on the motor, temperature sensors all over, and we'd do 100k, stop, and they'd measure everything. In those days, they had thermometers to put in the oil, and it was just a check, check, check. Yeah, and they did that because they were paranoid because of the TX 750 overcooking the oil, because that was a big problem. Yeah, so we were doing that. So like I say, they just basically wanted us to do over 180k all the time. It's got to be over 180k, and that's where we want to check it. And so, you know, we were doing that for 3 weeks. So every day for 3 weeks, that's a lot of kilometres. Yeah, and they survived no problem. You know, they just do the day, stop, they just idle, no crack, crack, bang, bang, trying to cut out. They were just really good.
Yeah, very, very interesting piece of history if you actually know the history of that bike in particular, because it didn't get seen very much in the day.
A message here from Gary Coleman.
I know.
I sent him a photo of the bike. He said, yeah, not sure how we won, but I'll take it any day. Damn hard to ride in the conditions. That would have been on park in the rain, I guess.
Yeah, it was. It was very wet.
I thought he might have been in bed then and all that.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I tried to get him to come to Eastern Creek when we had took it there for the journos to have a ride, as in Jim Scatesbrook and Alan Cathcart, but he was away travelling or something, so he couldn't go. Which would have been nice because it's only him and Greg that have ever ridden it, and they did a good job.
I want to thank Mal, not just for tonight, but for actually being our esteemed patron. So, and even though we pay him big money, I didn't expect him to take up the job.
I thought I'd get a pay rise after tonight, but nothing.
No, in all seriousness, Mal's been really helpful to the club generally. I thought he only knew about 2 strokes, but he actually knows about 4 strokes as well.
A little.
So he's got a good ear. He's builds a wonderful LC, and really good with TZs, I know. But no, I really would like to thank you, mate, because you've promoted the club, you've promoted historic road racing, and I know a lot of people are coming in directly and indirectly because of you, and I really do appreciate it. It's nice that someone of your standing actually is happy to come and help represent the club. So many thanks, mate.
No problem.
We'll thank you.